Take your Bibles and find the book of Proverbs this morning. Proverbs chapter 19, that's where we'll be. Before I do that, I just want to thank you, church. It takes two sides of a partnership to make it work. And you all have been a blessing to be part of this faith family, even if I wasn't the pastor of the church here. Just the love you accepted our family. Got grandparents within the church here that aren't biological, but have see the kids more than their biological grandparents do and love them. You've been gracious when made mistakes and have not been quick to toss us out. We're closing in on 10 years together, and that's impressive because the average time the pastor's at a church is 18 months. This thing doesn't work if it's one-sided, and I thank you all. And I also want to say thank you to my dear wife. Those things that some of you mentioned, the gift bag to help you get through the night at the hospital. I'm not that creative. That is my dear wife. A lot of the things that I do that you all think looks good, a lot of it comes from her brain, trying to keep me not looking like I'm weird, because I am. That's why me and Jordan get along so well, because we both have those same tendencies. But thank you. Talk to pastors, and one of the things that is kind of the sort of a joke amongst pastors is that we write a resignation letter every Monday morning. That's just kind of a thing that's said, and I just want to say at Birdport it's not the case. There have been some struggles throughout the time we've had together, but it's not been that way. And then pastors also say the easiest thing you have to do is preach. The hardest thing is to pastor. And that's not the case either. You all are easy to pastor. I don't want y'all to be in a hospital, but I sure do enjoy getting to spend time with you in the waiting room. Brother Denver and I got to know each other in waiting rooms, and Miss Betty, and then several other folks, and it's not that I have to do that stuff. That's the stuff I enjoy doing, spending time with you and doing life together. That's what we do as a church. And so thank you very much, and looking forward to a long time in the future together, and see what the Lord has for us as we try to reach Glenville and the world beyond together for the cause of Christ. Let's find the book of Proverbs, chapter number 19. Somebody asked me this morning what time I like to get into the pulpit to start preaching. I said 10 minutes after would be fine. But we're here at 20 till, and we'll not finish this message this morning. And I want to talk about God's answer for anger, how to deal with anger in our lives. The amazing thing about the Bible that you've got in your lap is that every issue you and I have throughout life is answered. The questions are answered within the pages of that word. That's why there's no external revelation, extra biblical revelation going on in this day and age. God doesn't have to speak to an audible voice or through dreams or through any of that stuff, because he's given us his completed word, all that we need to know about him, and all that we need to know about this life and the next is contained within those pages. It is a precious thing that you and I have in our laps, and it is a privilege to live in a place where we can read it, preach it, talk about it, and apply it without fear of retribution or persecution. And anger is no different. And if we're going to be honest, I know some of you in here are going to be pious and say, I don't have any problems with anger. You're liars, and we all know it. The fact is, we all deal with anger. Some of us have a little more of it than others, but we all deal with anger. If you're a parent, I know you're lying if you say you don't have any anger issues. I just know that's the case. Doesn't matter how good your kids are, at some point they're going to test that whole anger theory. And the fact is, we could all testify. We wouldn't want to. We could testify to moments in our lives that anger negatively affected our situation or our relationships or just in general what we were doing. All of us have those moments. We can look back on those days and say, when I reacted in anger, when I got angry and did this, it ruined this, or it messed this up, or whatever it was. There are even marriages that end. There are other problems, but anger may be the final straw, not just because there's problems, but because the anger on the part of one party or other in the marriage. And so we all have to deal with this. Even Christ in the New Testament, we'll talk about in a little bit, he had anger. And we have to understand that the biblical view of anger is not that it is automatically sin when you are angry. It's not the case. The Bible says in the book of Thessalonians to be angry and sin not. He says be angry. If you want to take a command, an easy one to follow, that's an easy one, isn't it? We can all get there. Be angry. I got that one covered. But the fact is, our reaction to anger, the way that it controls us, is where you and I get into trouble as Christians. And so I want to start this morning. We're not going to finish it this morning, but I want to start talking about what God has to say in his word about anger in our lives and the way that we react to it. And so if you'll find Proverbs chapter 19, let's look just at one verse, and If you're taking notes this morning, I'm going to give a lot of references, and so we don't have time to look at all of those. And if you need that list after we're done, come and see me, and I'll be happy to give you this list. But Proverbs chapter 19, just look at that one verse, verse number 19 of Proverbs 19. It says, a man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. And if you look at verse number 14, that's the one I should have read. We'll get to 19 in a minute. Chapter 19 and verse number 11. Man, I'll get there. The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over transgression. So there's some types of anger I want to talk about that are mentioned within your Bible. The first one of those is sudden anger. This is that anger that jumps on you. And I may be odd in this, but if I get hit in the head, it for some reason makes me angry. I don't know if anybody, it's like an anger, a pain that makes you want to punch something or somebody. Am I alone in that? It just, man, and don't ask me how I'm doing if I get hit in the head, because I will show you how I'm doing. It's that anger that it just jumps on you. There's no warning. Here it is. As a parent, sometimes your kids do things that they should just know better than to do, and yet they do them anyway because you never expressly said don't light the house on fire. You thought that was implied, but yet they did it, and that anger just jumps all over you. Sometimes in the middle of a marriage, a spouse will do something, and it's not anger that builds, but it's anger that's just right there. And that sudden anger becomes an issue. In fact, I think it was Will Rogers that said, people who fly into a rage seldom make a good landing. And isn't that the truth? Those that fly into a rage never make a good landing. They seldom do, because that sudden anger causes their reactions to be wrong. Let me say, how do you deal with sudden anger? Well, first of all, you got to confess your anger. You have to come to the place where you admit to yourself you're angry. Sometimes we don't like to even admit to ourselves that we're angry about whatever it may be, and you can fill in the blanks this morning about what causes your anger. I know some people have issues on the road with getting cut off in traffic. I know that because my father is that way. And in fact, as my kids have gotten older, they think it's hilarious to ride with my dad places in the car, especially if there's traffic, because he's going to be screaming and yelling at somebody for something at some point throughout the trip. And so for him, it's sudden anger comes in the form of road rage. My dad also yells at himself when he plays golf. He is competitive. In fact, this is not an exaggeration. I have gotten calls from 3 different pastor friends of mine, preacher friends of mine, that have asked about my dad on the golf course. One of them said, he said, "Preacher, what do you do if you're out playing golf with a pastor and he starts calling himself retarded?" I'm like, "You're playing golf with my dad, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." Phil Skibber was playing golf with him one time and had to say, "Pastor, I need you to calm down. I'm out here to enjoy myself. You're yelling at yourself and it's making me crazy." And the fact is that sudden anger, it comes sometimes out of nowhere. It can be for a justified reason. It can be for a ridiculous reason, like you've hit a ball in the water. But that anger will jump on us. And the first thing we need to do is to admit ourselves that we are angry. That we are angry. That sudden anger is mentioned in Proverbs 19:19, Proverbs 14 and verse 17. In fact, look back there at Proverbs 14, verse 17. We can read these real quickly. They're just a few pages over. Proverbs 14:17. He that is soon angry, that's suddenly, who that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. If you look at chapter 15 and verse number 18, a wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. Chapter 25 and verse number 8, chapter 29 and verse number 20, they all deal with this thing of anger just jumping all over us. And if you read the book of Proverbs, you almost wonder if Solomon was writing from a place of experience, that he knew what anger was like, because he has so much to say about it in the book of Proverbs alone. If you and I want to deal with our anger the right way, to be angry and sin not, that sudden anger that jumps up within us, we need to first of all admit that that's what it is. So often we try to justify our anger by shielding it behind something else. Have you ever done that? Well, I'm not angry, I'm just whatever. I'm not angry, I'm just this. And instead we need to confess the fact that we are angry. We often don't admit it to ourselves. And when I begin to feel that anger boiling up within me, what I first need to do is realize I'm angry. And go to God with that, especially if you're prone to sudden bursts of outrage. Those are not pleasant people to be around. They're just not. And so we need to make sure that we confess our anger. Let me say it secondly, we need to consider our anger. Verse number 29 of chapter 14 of Proverbs. Flip over just a little bit. He that is slow to anger is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. You know what we need to do would help us react the right way? will be, first of all, to consider our anger. To be slow to anger rather than to be quick to it and react poorly. We need to figure out what it is that's making us angry and contemplate whether or not it warrants the reaction with which I'm about to take place. Because a lot of times the answer is no. And so confess that you're angry. Confess to the Lord Jesus Christ of that sudden anger. Consider it. Look and see what's making you react with anger. Be sure to consider the entire situation before you do or say something. Especially, look, husbands and wives, this is good advice, and I'm not preaching to you as a guy that's got it figured out, but this is good advice for us in a marriage. If we're having issues, before we react in anger, let's hang on a second, put the pause button in, replay it, and see what's going on. And maybe there's some things that shouldn't be said, or maybe there's something that shouldn't be done. And if I'm not careful, I'll react in anger, and that's what Proverbs 14 is saying there. Not only do I need to consider my anger, but I'm going to hurry along and get through at least one of these this morning. I need to also control my anger. Proverbs 29:11. He says it just a minute ago. We read it. Look at Proverbs 29:11 again. I'm getting there. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in until afterwards. I found this verse about 2 years ago, and I'm still working on it because it's hard. I've tried to start applying this verse to my life. Can you imagine the difference this verse alone would make in our lives, in our relationships to each other, whether it's within the home, with the spouse, or with the children, or your boss at work, or a coworker? If you were able to put Proverbs 29:11, a fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in until afterwards. You know what he's saying there, right? He said it's a foolish man that gets angry and just says everything that's in his brain. It's a wise man that says, hang on a second, I got some thoughts flying around in here that may not need to be said, and if I say them, they may do damage that is beyond what needs to be done. Let me hold on and keep it until afterwards, and then after I've had a second to think about it, to consider it, then I can control it. So Proverbs 29:11, if you're one of those people, I'm not going to call you out this morning, if you're one of those people prone to sudden bouts of anger, Proverbs 29:11 is a good verse to try to help control that anger. Realize that it's a fool that says everything he's thinking. You ever been around those people? I had to go to a seminar for work about 3 weeks ago. We went with a guy, and nice guy, but the man he's allergic to dead air. And there was 4 of us in the car on the way we had to go all the way to Macon for this particular class. And on the way there, I promise you, there wasn't a 0.3 of a second where there wasn't something being said. And it's just like whatever's it's coming out, whether anybody's interested or not. And there it is. And some of us do that on a regular basis. You've got to be careful with it, because some people don't have enough up in their mind to say a whole lot. But others of us do that. We speak all our mind when we are hit with a sudden fit of anger. And Proverbs 29:11 says, it's a fool that uttereth all his mind. And friends, if we look back at the damage that we have done at points in our lives when we were angry and just started saying what was in our brain, whether it's to our kids, to our spouse, or to someone else, how much better off would we be to hold on a second, consider our anger, confess it to the Lord, and then once we've got our emotions under control, say what needs to be said rather than just throwing it all out there. So you might want to control our anger. We need to consider it. We need to confess it for those that are dealing with sudden anger. Let me say, not only do we deal with sudden anger, we also deal with sinful anger. And it's got to be condemned. Sinful anger is that anger that oftentimes arises out of pride. In fact, the book of Proverbs also says that only by pride cometh contention. You know what contention is, right? Contention is that awkward thing that goes on between two people when you oftentimes walk in the middle of it and you can just tell things ain't right. You ever been around there? You ever been there? Yeah, you have. It's that contention, those strife, that issues, the disunity that comes up between people. Proverbs says only by pride. And if you're not dealing with sudden anger, sometimes we deal with that sinful anger. That's me reacting to someone wronging me, and I react because I don't deserve that. There's one thing for making sure that you're standing up for yourself. It is another thing to react in anger every time something doesn't go your way. You know what kind of a person reacts in anger every time something doesn't go their way? An 18 to 36-month-old. Right? If you don't believe me, if you parents, y'all remember, some of us are in that stage now. Look, you make that little one, you do something they don't think they deserve, they're going to get mad, they're going to scream, they're going to cry. If the kid's not been disciplined, they're going to start falling down on the ground and stomping and doing all kind of stuff. I remember watching one of my favorite episodes of Andy Griffith was one where Opie decided that he could get his way with Andy if he started throwing a fit, and he started holding his breath, and that didn't work, and then he fell on the ground and started kicking and screaming, and it didn't work. But that's the reaction of an immature person. And if you and I react not just with sudden anger, but with sinful anger when we are wronged, be very careful, because it is a deep ditch we can get into. We talk about sinful anger that needs to be condemned. If I don't have sufficient cause, that anger becomes sinful anger. Just write down Matthew 5, verse number 22. If I don't have sufficient cause to be angry, you know what happens sometimes, and I see it with our kids dealing with each other at home, and it's maddening. And we talk about this within our household. So often with people that we don't have a close relationship with, we give them the benefit of the doubt when they do something that upsets us or is contrary to us. Have you noticed that? Somebody that I don't know very well, if I don't know, whatever it is that we're doing, and they say something and it offends me, if I don't know them, I'm going to give them, okay, they probably didn't mean that. But why is it? Why is it so oftentimes when we have people that we're closer to, when they say something that maybe they didn't intend to come out that way, or they said it the wrong way, they get no benefit of the doubt. We're going to judge them immediately and get angry. I don't know why it works that way. I don't know why we do that to the people that we love the most, that we're the closest to. We give them the least leeway when it comes to this thing, and we'll get angry about it. And in those moments, there are times when you and I get angry that we don't have sufficient cause to be angry. Somebody accidentally said something a wrong way. Somebody looked at me the wrong way. Have you ever, did you see the way they looked at me? You know what? Take it down a level there, Sparky. It probably wasn't intended to make you mad. They may not even looking at you anyway. Maybe something behind you. Maybe there was an explosion behind you. You didn't hear it, but they were looking at that. That's why they looked at you like they couldn't believe your hairdo was that high. And the fact is, we have to be very careful when we start to deal with that sinful anger. If we are angry without sufficient cause, anger is sin. Husbands and wives, you know what we ought to do with each other? Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he didn't say that the way he should have, but it probably wasn't malice with his intent. Maybe she shouldn't have done that, but it wasn't on purpose. She wasn't doing it to make you angry or to offend you. We need to deal with that sinful anger. If we're not sufficient cause and it's sinful anger. Let me say also, if I'm angry against a person rather than an injustice, that becomes a sinful anger. This I never really understood growing up in the Christian. You know, we have our own language, right, Christians? We have our own jargon that we can use. I mean, it's hilarious to hear somebody just get saved, and when they even pray in church, they don't have any of that special Christianese that we use to pray. They're going to talk to God, and it's sometimes amazing. Instead, we're like, our great Father, we beseech and bequeath thee that thou wouldest. Look, let's just not speak in a whole different language. But one of the things you used to hear growing up was be angry at the sin, hate the sin, and not the sinner. But you know that really is the way that things ought to work. When we see an injustice, we should be angry at it, but not at those necessarily who are perpetrating that crime. Why is that? Because they're most likely unsaved, lost people that are behaving that way because that's the natural man, and if you and I weren't saved, who's to say we wouldn't be doing that same thing? And when we're angry without sufficient cause, it becomes a sinful anger. When we are angry at a person and not an injustice, that becomes an anger that is sinful, and it has to be condemned. There's no room for that in your life and in mine. It is the action that should anger me and not the person that is involved with that action. And look, that is hard. That is hard to deal with, isn't it, Christian? If we're being honest, that's hard to separate the person from the action. And yet, that's what we ought to strive to do. We ought to strive to separate those two. Let me hurry along. We got a few minutes left. Let me say this also. If I have a desire for revenge rather than to right an injustice, that anger is sinful. And I can give you some verses. Romans chapter 12, verse number 19. You can mark that one down. I think he says something about revenge is his. I think that's the way that the book says it. It's his, not ours. And friends, when we keep in mind in this life that this is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is his, not yours. And if there's an injustice, what we ought to do is let God handle it and just pray that his will is done there. Now, that doesn't mean if someone is wronging you that you continue to allow the wrong. You probably should separate yourself from that. But in order to try to get revenge, to try to play that hit last game that so often you play? Y'all play that when you were kids? That dumb game where you punch each other's knuckles? I don't know why we played that in grade school. That is a stupid game. And you just keep hitting each other until somebody says stop? That's dumb. You're both hurting. And yet, there are often times in our relationships where we're both angry and you're both just going to keep swinging until somebody says stop. And at the end of the thing, you both got bruised knuckles. It's that anger where we're more looking for revenge than we are to right the injustice. That becomes sinful anger. This is a result oftentimes of a lack of a willingness to forgive. A brother or sister in church wrongs you, or you perceive the wrong, and they come and apologize. And you really would rather see revenge than forgiveness, then that's sinful anger. That needs to be condemned in your life and in mine. And if we were truthful, every one of us struggle with that, because that's that human emotion that we get involved in, where we want to see that fixed. We want to see it made right. Vengeance, not justice. So we got sudden anger. It needs to be sudden anger needs to be controlled. Sinful anger needs to be condemned. Let me say number 3, Ephesians chapter number 4 and verse number 26. Stubborn anger, that's got to be conquered. That's that anger that we just maintain. It's an anger that keeps me mad. We got to learn to let it go. I watched, have you ever seen people that get mad and at some point they forget why they're mad? They're just mad. What do? I don't have any idea, but man, he's a jerk. Right? That's that old Hatfield and McCoy. You know, been feuding for 5 generations. What is the feud about? I don't know, but they're jerks. And that's anger that's stubborn. It just doesn't let itself go. It's not assuaged. It doesn't diminish. It's seared in there and it stays. And can I tell you, in that situation with that stubborn anger, can I tell you who's the one that's paying? It's you. You are. Not the person you're mad at. I got to be honest with you, they're probably sleeping like a baby at night. They either don't care or they've let it go, and yet you or I, we hold on to that stubborn anger, and it gives us indigestion, causes ulcers, it makes us sick. We just hold on to it. That stubborn anger that does not go away. This stubborn anger, just need to let it go, even if we don't know why. Come to the place, say it's just not worth it. We become focused on, not on getting right, but on staying mad. I saw kind of an interesting picture, and I'm sure y'all have seen it too, the other day. It was of a handsaw, like a hacksaw, and there was a snake around that hacksaw. Have y'all seen this? A snake wrapped around the saw. Obviously, the snake was dead. And this short little story that goes along with it was that the snake deserved to die just because it was a snake, by the way. That's just extra. But the snake was going by the saw, and it got too close, and it cut itself. And the snake reacted in anger, wrapped itself around the saw, started to constrict, and actually killed itself on the saw because that anger caused it to react the wrong way. So often somebody or something hurts us, not even on purpose, and we're going to attack it. That anger is going to stay stubborn. It's going to stay hot until we get revenge. And we're the ones that end up getting hurt by the matter, not the other offending party. This kind of stubborn anger, it ruins lives. You know what anger will do for you, stubborn anger in your life? It will ruin your testimony before a lost world. It is the antithesis of what a Christian ought to be known for. Jesus, talking to his disciples, said, "By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, by the anger that you have one for another." He said, by the love that you have one for another. It is the opposite of the character traits that you and I ought to have for each other. We ought to love each other, and anger does not fit in there. And when the world sees you and I mad at each other, holding a grudge, not reacting the right way, they say, look at there, they're just as bad as we are. Their God tells us that he's forgiven them, but they're not forgiven. They're going to be angry. Testimony's ruined. That stubborn anger, it is dangerous. It'll ruin your testimony. It ruins lives. Not only does it ruin your testimony, it ruins relationships. We talk about the negative health effects of anger in your life, chronic anger. There have been several case studies done on what anger and bitterness does to the body, not the spirit and soul, but to the body. And it has been pretty conclusively proven that kind of stubborn anger, that kind of anger that you're holding on to, you're the one that's getting hurt by it, physically getting hurt by it. And so we have this stubborn anger that get angry, but to get over it. Anger prevents me from forgiving the way that Christ has told us to forgive. Ephesians chapter 4 says, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. You know, one of the beautiful things that you and I are able to do when there's an issue between each other or between someone else, forgiveness. It is an amazing thing that what forgiveness will do. It is amazing, and that's why we're told with each other that we're to forgive. And then he goes on, not just to forgive each other, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. So the question becomes, what has that other individual or people done to you? What have they done to you that's worse than what you did to the law of God before you got saved? And I would submit to you today, there's nothing that would be worse than that. God forgave you of those things. The least you can do is forgive that person, those people, of whatever that little thing they did to upset you or hurt your feelings or make you angry. It's tiny in comparison. And we talked about that debtor that was forgiven a ton of debt and then went out and tried to collect on minute debts. And the king had him put in prison because of his lack of forgiveness. He didn't pay it forward. So we're told to be angry, but to get over it. And then, no, I'm done. It's 12 o'clock. We'll finish the rest of this. We got two more that we'll get to the next time we're together. But look, listen to me, friends. If you and I have an anger issue, we got to work that thing out. If you struggle with that in your life, that is not a godly character trait if you react in anger very often. Whether it's whatever it may be. What we need to do is find a place in our lives where, first of all, we give people the benefit of the doubt, where we come to the place where we know that the Word of God tells you and I that we're to love each other, and I cannot be angry and love you at the same time. It doesn't happen. This doesn't happen because my anger will cause me to hate you. In fact, Jesus talks about it if a man hates his brother. And then to the last place, we get to the Ephesians chapter 4 and find the command to forgive. Friends, you're not going to forgive if you're holding on to that anger. You're not going to. You may say it, maybe lip service, but at the end of the day, your anger, if it's still in there, it's burning. It may be coals, but eventually it's going to flame up again. There's not true forgiveness there. So the Bible's got a lot to say. And next week we'll get into the biblical definitions of anger and the types of anger from Ephesians chapter number 4, and it'll be a help to you. At least it was a help to me. And then we'll talk about how we're to react with holy anger. There's some anger in the Word of God that we're told to actually have. And we'll talk about that the next time we're together too. Would you piano player come? Your heads are bowed and your eyes are closed.